Good morning and welcome back to The Bridge. Today, of course, we are in Philippians. We're actually going to be looking at chapter 1, 12 through 18. I believe this is our third week in the little book, the little letter of Philippians. And we're just taking little bite-sized pieces as we kind of track alongside of the sermon series, I should say, or the book that we're going through, preaching through on Sundays, which is the Gospel of Mark. And we'll be in chapter 2, verses 1 through 12 today. Paul opened this little letter to the Philippians with his typical greeting, then a prayer. Follow with me now as he transitions in verses 12 through 18, picking up where we left off last week. Follow with me. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice, yes, and I will rejoice. It's interesting because where we stop there is actually in the middle of a sentence, which we'll pick up next week, but I'm glad because we see, the interesting thing about this is that Paul is rejoicing. He actually repeats himself there, and we know that he's in prison. So it's so interesting. Paul, the prisoner, is encouraging the church instead of the other way around. Paul is not writing them, thanking them for their care baskets, the bread, the olive oil, all the figs they brought to him. No. Paul's encouraging them, assuring them that even though he's in jail, the gospel is advancing, which is amazing. And, it's advancing here we see in two different ways. His own preaching to the prison guards, that's number one. Number two, it spurred others on in great confidence to be bold, as the text says, in proclaiming Christ. I was reminded of what Job said to the Lord in the last chapter, Job 42:2. He said, I know you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. And obviously, 2,000 years later, the gospel is just as relevant. The proclamation of Christ is just as important and is happening all over the world. Paul knew who he served. He knew God's plan and that Christ would come again to reign, no doubt about it. And Paul was singularly focused. He would definitely be considered today a fanatic. And the thing he woke up thinking about and went to sleep thinking about was proclaiming the gospel. And you see that in the opening here of the text where he says, my imprisonment has helped to advance the gospel. This is all that he thought about. So what about you? What are you thinking about or obsessing about right before you close your eyes at night? What is your first thought when you wake up in the morning? These answers, if we're honest, can be very revealing about our heart. In 2021, more than ever, God is calling Christians, you and I, to be bold and preach Christ no matter what the perceived cost. In verse 15, Paul transitions, and I'm not going to go very deep in this, but Paul's transitioning and addressing or talking about a group of people that we really are not sure who they are. It's possible that they were the Judaizers that we see later in this little letter, I believe in chapter 3, or simply preachers that felt they could compete with Paul to gain followers. Some, he said, that do it with good intentions. Some others that are trying to compete or gain maybe recognition. But Paul's like, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me as long as Christ is preached. And Paul said in 1 Corinthians 1:23 that he preached Christ crucified. See, that was Paul's obsession. That was Paul's life mission. That was his legacy, his work, is he died for that message. I urge you to ponder. I really want us to think about together this week and consider the context of this passage. Paul is in chains and later dies for this gospel. Also consider the entire New Testament that we have in our hands was written to a persecuted church, Christians that were persecuted for their faith. I want you to let that sink in today. The first century Christians were being killed for their faith, for being a Christian, for proclaiming Christ publicly. They would lose their livelihood, their social status, and ultimately their life for Christ. So, some questions for you and for me. Why are you not proclaiming Christ in Myrtle Beach or even just in the United States in 2021? Why are you silent? Are you at risk of losing your job? Are you at risk of losing acceptance in certain social circles? Are you fearful of being killed because you share Jesus with everyone who will listen? The persecution here today in America is trending up. Is it because we're going to get killed? No, probably not. Not yet. But standing up for the truth today, when it comes to biblical principles and views, we are persecuted. There's no question about that. Standing up for the truth is worth it, and we have our early church heroes to thank and to look towards for motivation. I challenge you today, friends and brothers and sisters in Christ, to not shrink back when God gives you an opportunity. As Paul said, to be bold. When the Spirit opens a door for tough conversations, I pray that you would be ready to explain where you stand on abortion. Be ready to explain why you believe marriage is between a man and a woman. Be ready to explain and proclaim your stance that there are only two genders, male and female. And do it all in love. That's so important. Proclaiming Christ. Paul said, "For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes." See, your boldness, your proclamation of Christ today, the gospel today, could be the difference for someone's eternity. I think it's worth it, don't you? So join with me today and every day rejoicing, as Paul says, as we proclaim Christ together to the world. Talk to you next time.